Hello, welcome to a recording of stress management during times of acute distress, coping with COVID-19. I'm Ethan Swift. My pronouns are he, him, and they, them. I'm a full-time intern and full-time counselor as well at at the UMBC Counseling Center. And Jen, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Jen Martinez, pronouns they, them. I'm also a doctoral intern at the UMBC Counseling Center as well as a full-time counselor. And excited to be talking about how to manage stress and strategies to manage the um, novelty of COVID-19.
Absolutely. I'll jump into the objectives. So we'll be going over the general stress related to COVID-19, some coping strategies, how to establish a routine or just keep up with the routine that you've made, some goal making strategies. And the question and answers is obviously for live, but we'll definitely take time to pause and reflect on what we're doing, so we get a chance to kind of soak in what we're learning. Um, so with the unique impact of COVID-19, there's a lot of uncertainty and a high degree of unknown, which for many folks, you might say this is a collective trauma. In that sense, not knowing what's going to happen next could be very scary, and limiting in how to cope if you don't really know what's next or what you're going to be coping with. Um, it's also difficult to find experts who often agree or who do agree because they often don't, which makes it even more difficult to kind of know where to get your reliable information. Um, I know I've been accessing the CDC website and World Health Organization. That's been really helpful for me. Um, and then I want to also add, like right now, it's difficult to access care, healthcare, and mental health care. When you think about like going to the doctor for a checkup, many folks are even scared to go to the doctor for a checkup because it's like, well, that's an unsafe place right now, or it feels unsafe, or maybe I'm taking services away from others. So I know like it feels really difficult to access that care. And in this like collective trauma, everyone's a potential victim and or a survivor. Um, and our networks of support are compromised. With that said, like a lot of folks are going through a lot, and it feels like it's difficult to access people physically and even over text because people are going through so much. How do we kind of feel connected to folks? But when we are connected, our support can offer substantive validation. This kind of idea that we're all in this together, many folks are able to support that with you. So maybe we'll take a pause, um, wondering how does the COVID-19 pandemic affect you? Pandemic, excuse me. So for example, we're all, or many of us are experiencing fear of infection and fatality. With that comes trauma and grief, like I mentioned before. Um, Feeling isolated, loss of usual routine, cancellations of plans and events. We're approaching midsummer, and it feels like, what do we do? How do we do it? And we can't do what we thought we would. So take a moment to pause, um, and have yourself um, asking yourself, how about you? How have you been impacted? I know I really relate to the social isolation and loss of usual routine. Jen, if you feel comfortable sharing how you've been impacted, that's fine. Um, I'm here for it. But I'm also curious. Obviously, this is not live, but what maybe comes up for folks? I encourage you to think about that as well.
Yeah, I think I'll kind of expand on some of the things that you have mentioned because I think that my experiences may be similar to what other folks are kind of ways that they may be affected too. And I think one thing has been a lot of plans and vacations and trips to see family and friends that have been canceled. And I think the disappointment and some grief around those plans and not being able to have them, and also the part of not knowing when those can be rescheduled. I think that's what's causing a lot more sadness for me of just because of how uncertain the future is looking. um, you know, not knowing when I'm going to have those in-person connections or be able to take a trip that I wanted to take. And I think, we just finished um, kind of the graduation season, and there may be folks who've either yourself or family members who weren't able to have the graduation experience that they expected. And so there's a lot of mourning around that, um, and I think that it's a growing pandemic, and so we may have been touched by either within our family members or even in our wider networks of people who've gotten ill, who may have died as a result of COVID-19 or complications related to it. And so there are just a lot of different ways that um, this may be affecting us and really creating a lot of distress for us.
Yeah, I appreciate you adding that, Jen. And I also want to name that marginalized communities thus far have been the most impacted by COVID-19. Um, Generally speaking, when there's a crisis in the world or there's difficulty with kind of health concerns, it affects vulnerable populations the most. Whether they have a disability or long-term health issues, limited English proficiency to both learn about what's available in terms of resources that are typically in English, or communicating with health professionals that typically speak English, in addition to just the hardships that come with not speaking English in a primarily English country. Um, Impacts them, as well as individuals with limited financial resources or safe housing. It's definitely difficult to quarantine when you don't have a safe place to house. Um, and the financial resources of taking care, and in addition to that, like the luxury of working from home. Maybe luxury is a strong word for some folks, but many folks don't have access to any sort of work from home processes. Either they don't have a job, or they have to be in a job where they're facing unsafe circumstances. Um, Similarly, with undocumented individuals, access to care is more difficult, access to financial resources is more difficult. Um, a lot of different hurdles come with that, and um, Asian and Asian American folks experiencing a lot of racism and xenophobia, international students not being able to go home or having to go home and not being able to come back. And I also want to name against Black and Brown communities too. We're kind of in a place where racism is showing its ugly face. I mean, it's always been there, but we're definitely seeing it now in full force, and just want to name that as well. Jen, do you want to add anything to this slide as I kind of pause? Okay. Yeah, I just, I want to name that this is definitely impacted greatly by marginalized communities. The more vulnerable, the more likely you're going to have difficulty accessing that care.
Yeah, I think one thing I do want to add is, and it's something that just happened pretty much over the weekend, is that trans folks have also lost protections for healthcare as well, and so I think that's also a piece of people's um, a lot of marginalized folks are losing access to healthcare in the midst of this pandemic too, and that's, I think, ways that you know these different systems of power and oppression are kind of making vulnerable communities even more vulnerable to COVID.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. um, we have this sort of piece that allows us to identify when we've experienced too much stress. So there's three categories of the symptoms of too much stress: physical, behavioral, and emotional. Um, And if we are able to identify the sections of these different areas in which we may be experiencing symptoms, whether it's physical, behavioral, or emotional, then we might be able to better identify when we're stressed and what we could do about it. So if I'm noticing that, wow, I feel a lot of heartburn, stomach pain, back pain, I'm feeling difficulty in my behavioral world, I'm being unlikely to ask for help, overly critical of others, unable to sit still, feeling emotional, angry, confused, sad, that might be a sign that, hey, I need to work on improving maybe what I'm experiencing, kind of decreasing that stress. We'll definitely get into some of how to cope, but I would recommend you take a look at this chart and see which categories you fit in. Are you feeling stressed? Are you not? Are you feeling a little bit stressed, but could definitely improve on what you're feeling? Um, so I definitely want you to take into consideration these different aspects.
Yeah, and I think one thing I'd want to add is that, part of listing all of these is to recognize that there's just so many different ways we might be experiencing stress. And it can look very different from moment to moment and from person to person. I think part of this is really to kind of almost create some sort of profile for yourself of like, when do I know I'm the most stressed? And and I think a lot of these symptoms too, when I read them, I'm like, oh, I didn't realize that that's a part of stress. Right. And so recognizing that, it impacts us in so many different ways that we may not even recognize or make that connection.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about all the reasons why you may be stressed, and how you might be experiencing that, and it probably has made you feel even more stressed. And so we want to, the point of this isn't to just add to more of the stress or just simply remind you of how stressed you might be, but to really give you some strategies um, to help manage that. And I think, we're going to present this FACE COVID acronym that I think is going to be really helpful for folks. We have a little image of this boat um, in the storm on the water. And I think it just is a really important metaphor that we want to be bringing um, to this discussion in terms of, that when we are, a ship out at sea, that we can't what you want to do to help kind of get through that storm, what's the most helpful in that moment is to drop your anchor, um, and kind of help stay in that place and let that storm pass. um, right, that trying to fight against that storm may be much more detrimental than helpful. um, and I think a piece of this is, you know, two things are coming to mind. One is that we can drop our anchor and kind of be able to ground ourselves and center ourselves in ways that can take care of us in the midst of the storm. And that doesn't take away the storm itself, right? So we're going to be talking about strategies to help manage stress and recognizing that it doesn't mean that the stress goes away completely, right? Or that what's causing the stress is going to go away, because there are things that are out of our control, like a storm out at sea. Um, but there are things that we can't control, such as dropping that anchor. Um, and also, kind of going back to Ethan's point about ways that folks may be more vulnerable during this time, is that, you know, we all might be in the same storm, but we all are on different ships, right? And so, depending on the types of resources we might have, or different privileges, we might have like a giant, um, like a naval ship that's just like ironclad and can easily kind of weather any storm. Um, or we can have like a tiny little like fisherman's boat that easily floods and, that may not be able to stay anchored very well. And I think part of this is also to recognize, like, what kind of what kind of boat or ship are we in? And then can we be kind to ourselves depending on how much, particularly if we have the smaller boat, if we drop our anchor and it's still difficult to manage the stress, like that's not about you, right? That's about this more systemic piece of, you know, having to manage this storm with not without having the adequate resources. But we're going to provide um, some internal resources for you to try to be able to weather this. So we'll be going through each piece of the FACE COVID acronym in the subsequent slides.
Yeah, and just to add, this was developed by Russ Harris, Dr. Russ Harris. Cool. Just want to make sure I added that. Thanks.
Yes. Thanks for giving credit to the person who created this. So for the first letter of the acronym for FACE COVID is focus. Focus on what's in your control. I think that's what's really difficult about this moment is that it feels really hard because there's so many things that are not in our control, and that makes it a lot scarier. And I think part of trying to help kind of be okay in this moment is to recognize what can we control and what can't we control. And I find this image really helpful in that it can give us some ideas of what those things are. So the things that we can't control, that we then want to try to let go of them and let go of that control of them, um, might be whether or not others are following the rules of social distancing or wearing masks, right? That we can't control how other people behave, and I think the more that we feel like we can, the more we get upset about it, about something we can't control. It's really going to take just more of our own emotional resources rather than actually change what other people are going to do. And that goes for also how other people are acting. Um, whether they are, again, following the social distance rules or are, not, or like having barbecues and having gatherings and things like that, or kind of just not practicing all of the guidelines that are recommended. Another piece is trying to predict what will happen. So trying to figure out when this will end, how how long this will last, how people are going to who's going to be affected, and how much are they going to be affected by this. Maybe our own financial or housing insecurity or job security or any of those things. We can't actually control a lot of these pieces. And so what can we control? I think it's probably really stressful to hear all the things we can't control, but we control our ability to follow the CDC guidelines, to do the things that we can for ourselves and the people around us to prevent the spread of COVID-19. We can engage in the proper social distancing and wearing face masks, and you can turn off the news and limit social media. I think there's a piece that it's that sometimes it's getting to the point where it's not so much getting information relevant to our own safety and well-being, but it's exposing us to a lot of more distressing things about things we can't control, mostly other people's actions, right? And so can we limit what that is, so that it's just not taking away from our own emotional resources? And trying to find some fun things to do at home. Um, I think if there's more time to be able to spend in the spaces where we're having to kind of hunker down in, what are ways that we can use that to do activities that we find enjoyable and that bring us some amount of joy in the midst of this really stressful time? I don't know if you have anything to add, Ethan. And so the next part of face is acknowledge. So acknowledging your thoughts and feelings. Yeah, so the point of all of the slides at the beginning to really have you think about what's making you stressed and how are you experiencing stress is really to kind of create that acknowledgement and that awareness. Um, that we might be experiencing multiple emotions at once, or they may be changing from day to day, and that we can be um, experiencing maybe more acute distress, which really takes a lot more of our cognitive resources, or it might be we might start to be adjusting to some routines. And I think recognizing where we are in that process and how our own emotions are in that moment help us really try to calibrate what strategies or what we want to be doing um, to help take care of ourselves. And I think it's also okay, that there's so much going on that it's okay to be having no reaction as a reaction, that really that everyone is responding and coping in different ways. And, there might be some days where you just don't have the capacity to feel all of those emotions. Um, and so kind of just meeting yourself and your own body and your mind where they are. And then, um, if it's if they're if you're experiencing a lot more distress, thinking about, well, what are steps I can take um, to make that feel a little bit more manageable. And so some strategies that might be helpful for that is to really come back into your body. Um, and so, kind of thinking about that physical anchor piece, right? That, what can help us when our mind might be spiraling and thinking about all of the things that are worrisome or stressing us out, that they take us away from being able to even feel like we're here, a person in this moment. Um, and so some strategies to help do that is to really engage in your senses. So one, particularly with touch, that pushing your feet firmly to the ground can give us the sense of really feeling both metaphorically and physically grounded, right? That we are here. Um, you might you might slowly press your fingertips together. Some of that more tactile pressure can help you focus on just your body in this present moment, and what you're doing. Or you might focus on your breath. So just paying attention to the sensations of inhaling and exhaling. That part of that these strategies are helping us feel connected to what's happening to us right now, right? Because that's something we can control. We can't control what's going to happen, you know, later this week or a few months from now, but we can control, being present with what we're doing now, with the people around us. Um, and so these might be some ways to help. And one thing I do want to note is that you know part of this is that not all of these will work for everyone, and that we are presenting a number of different skills to have a bunch of tools in your toolkit. Um, and um, some of them might work and some of them might not. And so part of this is to provide as many different options as possible to see what would be the most helpful for you. Okay. And the last letter of this is the E, engage in what you're doing. So the first piece, we're talking about really trying to be in the present moment and what you're doing with maybe the people you're with. Um, and this is continuing to use our different senses. So one is just looking around the room and notice 5 things you can see. So maybe take a moment right now to just identify 5 things and describe maybe the color, the texture. Imagine if you had to describe this object to an alien, right? How would you describe it to them? How would you describe its use? And really kind of getting into those details and noticing all of those small things. Another piece, is noticing 3 or 4 things you can hear, right? So similarly, what are the sounds that you may not have been aware of, but that you're able to perceive, right? Whether that's birds chirping or maybe a neighbor talking on the phone or a truck honking its horn. Those are the sounds I hear right now. But, you know, kind of getting a sense of what's your environment like and what, you know, developing that awareness that we may not have been having. Noticing what you can smell or taste or sense just generally in your nose and mouth. Hopefully they're pleasant things, but just developing is a strategy to just develop that awareness of, all the sensations that are going on in your body. Um, and all of this is really to end these exercises, not just to just do these things just for the fun of it, but as practice to be attending to what you're doing in that moment, right? Whether that's spending time with friends or family or doing that activity that you really enjoy, that you can't actually fully enjoy it if you spend that entire time worrying in your own mind and not able to be in the present moment. And so this is just some strategies to help you bring yourself back into this moment.
Awesome. Um, as we move into the COVID portion of Face COVID, C is for committed action. So what can you do right now, no matter how small it may be, that might improve your life for yourself or others? That might be maintaining a daily routine and structure. It could be socializing, hobbies, protective measures. Um, I often tell people, like, try to use what's available to you. So if you look around your room, are you in a bedroom? Are you in a living room? Do you have games that maybe you haven't touched in a while? Do you have any pen and paper, art supplies, something that you could do to create, um, or something that you could do to engage with people? So whether that's going through your phone list or your friends list and seeing who's on there, who haven't you spoken to in a while, can you reach out to them? Something that you could do now and that's convenient and accessible. I also want to name, like, it when I say this, it could be easier said than done. Even what we say, no matter how small it may be. We have this image on the right. Don't, or it says sometimes just getting out of bed is a huge achievement. Don't underestimate that. So it's true. Sometimes just getting out of bed is really difficult. And if you get out of bed, that feels like an achievement, and that's okay. Even if you don't get out of bed, are you up and alert? That's an achievement as well. So definitely want to name that. And then opening up. So having self-compassion, so validating yourself, knowing that of course this is going to be difficult, and we think about what's in your reach, what's out of your reach. A lot of this is so out of our reach that there's really nothing we can do but be validating of ourselves and compassion of ourselves that we're trying our best. Um, some people find spiritual practices as a way to open up. So prayer might be one of those ways of doing that. I highly recommend prayer, even to people who maybe don't feel spiritual. There's ways to pray that aren't necessarily religious, but it may help us connect to ourselves better. D for values. So if you think about what kind of guides you in this process, um, we have a compass on the right. So basically, when you think of your values, you don't necessarily have a destination with a compass. You just have a direction. And then you do have a destination, but the compass doesn't bring you to the destination. It just shows you the direction you're going in. So similar to that, that's like your values. So who do you want to be as you go through this? How do you want to treat yourself and others? What are kind ways you could do to treat yourself as you go through this? How can we approach this with kindness? Kind words you can say to yourself. What will enable you to look back and say you feel proud of your response in years to come? So let these answers to these questions guide your committed actions. When we talk about that C in COVID, um, it also will help you choose and what you choose to do in this. And then identify resources, whether that's externally, so connecting with friends and family. I might invite you to ask yourself, what are some unique ways you have connected with others? Engaging in your hobbies and interests, YouTube, Netflix, art making, gaming. Ask yourself, what hobbies have you engaged in with lately? And connect with experts, whether that's the CDC, the UMBC Counseling Center, and we will have resources available at the end of this presentation, and therapists in your area. I also tell folks like a lot of insurance companies are waiving copays, not everybody, but many. So many people are getting teletherapy without having to pay a copay. And in addition to that, folks who are across state lines typically wouldn't have been able to work with a therapist in a different state. But if you found you connected with someone, maybe in your old city, if you moved, some therapists are willing to accommodate across state lines due to, it really depends on the laws of each state, but sometimes that's an option. I've seen it happen. Highly recommend that. And D is, I think, kind of one I hope we're all doing, and if not, that I understand. But disinfect and distance physically. So I want to take a moment to share the difference between social distancing and physically distancing. So physically, we have to be apart, but not necessarily socially. We could still connect in ways that are uh, innovative and unique and creative in ways that we haven't done before.
Yeah, and I think what can feel really um, disruptive about what's happening right now, and maybe even things that have been impacting our mood has just been really not having the routine that we're used to having. um, I think it just can feel really unsettling, and maybe by now folks have started to create that routine, or maybe now that we've shifted off of um, that spring semester into the summer, that now there's a new routine that we're trying to figure out. And so there are three kind of secret ingredients for really helping us develop a helpful routine, and one that really helps us emotionally too. I think it's something that we take for granted about how how much these three ingredients really help us um, kind of just at least feel okay. And so these are things that we do want to highlight. First is sleep. To be able to have a regular sleep cycle and schedule. Trying, I know it's hard in the summer when you can go to bed whenever you want, wake up whenever you want. For most folks, or some folks, um, but I really encourage you, even if you have that flexibility, to get up at the same time every day and to go to bed at the same time every night. Um, because I think that helps our body create its own um, circadian rhythm. And if folks have ever experienced jet lag, and how our body just like feels like it almost has like an illness, right? When when our sleep cycle's off, if we're changing the time we go to bed and wake up every day, we're inducing jet lag on ourselves. And so I think, in those cases, we can see in those extreme cases when our sleep is off that it really impacts how well we're able to concentrate, how well we're able to regulate our own mood, maybe more grumpy when we're tired, right, and snap at folks. And so I think it really highlights the reason why sleep and a regular sleep schedule is really crucial for us. And really trying to find kind of a designated sleep space, if you are able to, that wherever you sleep at night is kind of reserved only for what we like to say in the field, for sex and sleep, right? That you don't want, try as much as you can not to be like doing any homework on that space, or watching TV shows on your laptop or your devices, right? That you really want to create that association in your mind that that space is for sleeping, because that makes it easier then for you to fall asleep. Um, Another ingredient is exercising regularly, that it does help us create and set that circadian rhythm, right? And it also helps us regulate our mood, that particularly if we struggle with low mood or depression or anxiety, um, or even difficulty with attention, that exercise really helps our body and our brain kind of get that energy out there, and it also releases some of those endorphins that really help elevate our mood. But one thing to notice, try not to do this 2 hours before bedtime, because I think it activates our entire body, and then that creates difficulty falling asleep. And then, really having a regular eating and drinking schedule. So really trying to eat meals regularly if possible. Um, I think, we, similar to sleep, like we know that when we're really hungry, our mood changes. People can get hangry, they might be more disengaged, they might have difficulty concentrating. And so the more that we can be incorporating meals into our schedule, the better able we can have kind of the internal resources to regulate our mood. Avoid excessive nighttime liquids, trying to cut down on caffeine or alcohol, and to avoid smoking. That these things disrupt can impact our mood and can disrupt our sleep, or even kind of our eating cycle as well, right? And so kind of trying to be really careful of what um what may be disrupting these three important pieces of creating our routine. Is this still me? Okay. Um, so, so now that we've talked about some ways to try to create a routine, I think one thing that we want to emphasize is creating these SMART goals for ourselves. And so SMART is an acronym for a goal that's specific, that's measurable, that's achievable, that's realistic, and that's timely. And so, I think that the example that's in this photograph is a really great contrast between a SMART goal and a non-SMART goal. So a non-SMART goal might be get in shape. Right? It's not specific, so we don't know what specifically we're going to be doing, how often we're going to be doing it. Um, is it running? Are we swimming? What does getting in shape mean? Is it measurable? Getting in shape is not measurable. We don't know if we're in shape or out of shape, right? That the more, when it's really vague, that we can't know when we've reached our goal versus when we haven't. Um, and so we also don't know if it's achievable, right? So what in our mind do we think being in shape means? Is that being able to um, walk for 30 minutes or run a marathon, right? That depending on what the concrete goal we have in mind, we can know whether or not that's achievable, and to know whether it's even realistic too. If we are thinking, that we can be able to run a marathon in 2 weeks, right? That's not realistic, and that's not going to be achievable. And so, in some ways, we're then setting ourselves up for failure. Um, and then we also want it to be timely. So, we want to set a goal that, particularly if there's a deadline that we want to meet, that will allow us to meet that deadline. And so the goal on the right really is a SMART goal, right? Run 1 mile 5 days per week. It's specific. We know what activity we're doing, how often we're doing it. It's measurable. So we know whether or not we ran for 5 days and whether we ran for a mile on those 5 days. It's achievable, right? That's in some ways a realistic goal and achievable goal, because that's something that we may have the capacity to do. And then it's timely. So it's whether it's, in this case, we don't know if this person's training for some sort of race or whatnot, but that there is a way that they can engage in this um, in a way that seems reasonable um, in their day-to-day life.
So I'll jump in and just share some resources. I know you can't click the links, but they are available to you. WellTrack's available to you. It's an app that kind of helps you through as a mental health support. There's a counseling center office hours or after hours support line, some COVID related specific resources, specifics to responding to racism, 211. And I guess that's all. So I just want to thank y'all, and I appreciate you watching. So um, I hope this was helpful.
Yes, thank you all. And if you do have any questions or need more resources, feel free to reach out to us at the Counseling Center. We have resources on our website, as Ethan had mentioned. The website's not on here, but it's counseling.umbc.edu, or you can call our office. We also have events posted on my UMBC, so also look out for anything on there that might be of use. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.